Some words are simpler than a knife, but they can cut you right down to the bone. I've heard hard words in my life, from foremen, from clients, from all kinds of people, but nothing killed me inside like the words my daughter said that night. My dad smells like cement. It's embarrassing. When I heard her, I felt my heart stop. It wasn't from anger. It was because I understood that from that moment on, I had lost the only daughter I loved more than my own life. My name is Arthur Jenkins. I'm 73 years old. I'm a retired construction worker, and I live alone in a little house in Cleveland. I built this house with my own 2 hands stained with cement, working through sleepless nights while my wife, Mary, was in the hospital. I don't have any wealth, just 2 things: these hands and the memory of the woman who shared hunger and hardship with me for 30 years. This morning, the sunlight came through the window and hit the cup of black coffee on my old wooden table. I sat still, watching the steam rise like the breath of time. On the table was a pile of papers, invoices, contracts, catering orders. I read them one by one. Emily's name was on every line: 4-tier wedding cake, a white dress for $8,500, the Pinecrest Ballroom, 200 guests, every word, every number. It was like a drop of dried sweat on my forehead. For 18 months, I lived for a single day, Emily's wedding day. I sold my last piece of property, that little plot of land where I'd dreamed of building a small house to live out my last few years. But when Emily said, "I want a beautiful wedding so Mom can be proud from heaven," I agreed without a second thought. I believed nothing was too expensive if it was for my daughter's happiness. The kitchen where I'm sitting today was once filled with laughter. When Mary was alive, she'd hum while she cooked, and Emily would run around her, begging to help stir the soup. Now it's all silence. The ticking of the clock echoes in an empty house. I look at the family photo on the wall, Mary hugging Emily, and me behind them, my hands covered in cement dust, a smile trapped in the afternoon light. Outside, the roses are blooming. I planted them 20 years ago, right under Emily's window. Every morning I water them. I prune them carefully, because she used to say, "Dad, when I get married, I want to carry flowers from your garden. But today, with the roses at their most beautiful, I just feel a huge emptiness." They say the most terrifying part of getting old isn't death, but realizing you've lived your whole life for someone who no longer sees your worth. I never thought that saying was true until the day Emily told me my smell of cement embarrassed her. I take a sip of coffee, listen to the wind moving through the garden, and feel my heart cracking into tiny pieces. And I'm starting to tell this story not to complain, but so that someday, someone like me will understand that a father's dignity should never be traded for the love of an ungrateful child. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments below. 18 months. People use that time to raise a child until it can walk, and I used it to build my daughter's dream. Every day I was filled with an excitement that kept me alive, as if I were the one getting married. Ever since Emily and David announced their engagement, I started calculating, writing things down, scraping together every dollar from my pension and my small savings. In my old notebook, I wrote in big letters, "Emily's wedding, the happiness of my life." The land on the outskirts of Cleveland, the only thing left from my father, was something I'd always kept like a treasure. Every time someone offered to buy it, I'd say, "It's not for sale. That's where I'm going to build my little house, plant some trees, and wait for my old age." But the day Emily came and hugged me, saying, "Dad, I want a beautiful wedding, like in the movies," I looked into her eyes, and in that instant, all reason disappeared. I went to the title office, signed the sale without thinking. When the buyer put the stack of bills in front of me, my heart was pounding, not with sadness, but with joy. My daughter is going to be a princess. From that day on, I clung to that belief. I picked the biggest venue in the city, the Pinecrest, with its fountains and crystal chandeliers. When the manager asked me, "Are you sure, sir? The price isn't low," I smiled at him. "My daughter only gets married once, I'm sure." He signed the contract, and I signed it with my heart trembling with happiness. Every week, Emily would call me to go with her to look at dresses. I'd walk behind her in those brightly lit shops, watching her try on white gowns, twirl in front of the mirror, and smile. In those moments, I only saw the little girl who once asked me to put her on my shoulders to reach a flower in the park. When the designer told me the price, $8,500, I didn't even blink. I thought, how many more times will I get to see her like this? At night, back home, I'd sit at the kitchen table and organize the receipts. My calloused hands would go over the pages carefully, as if I were afraid of wrinkling a dream. I'd calculate every dollar, and after every total, I'd repeat to myself, it doesn't matter, as long as she was smiling. Sometimes the neighbors would visit and say, Arthur, how can you spend so much? Do you think your daughter will appreciate it? I'd answer calmly, she's a good kid. She just dreams a little big. And what father can deny his daughter's dream? I didn't know that dream would end up devouring everything I had left in life. But back then, I still believed. I believed that everything I was doing was right, that every dollar invested would turn into Emily's happiness. Every night I closed my eyes and listened to the wind in the rose bushes, imagining the day she would leave the house in her white dress. I would be there, in my old suit, but with my heart on fire. I believed it for 18 whole months, that if I tried hard enough, her wedding day would be the reward for a lifetime of being a father. There are afternoons when the sunlight comes in at an angle through the kitchen window, and I can hear Mary's laugh again, that clear, light laugh like the wind that slips through the rose bushes on the porch. It's been 8 years since she left, but I still feel her here, in the smell of the coffee, in the echo of my footsteps on the tiles I laid with my own hands. Mary died after a sudden illness. I remember that last day in the hospital clearly. She took my hand, her eyes tired but sweet. Arthur, don't let our daughter lack for anything. You hear me? That girl is all we're leaving in this world. I nodded, tears falling on her hand. I promise you, I'll give her everything so she doesn't suffer like we did. She smiled weakly. Give her everything, yes, but don't let her forget to love what's real, to love what made us who we are. That day, I only understood half of her words. I thought giving her everything meant money, an education, a bright future. I didn't understand that Mary was talking about a heart capable of valuing what's essential. I just thought about working, earning, paying. And every time Emily smiled, I told myself I was on the right path. After the funeral, the house became an empty void that swallowed me. Emily was 21. She was in college, thin and quiet. Every night I'd cook and wait for her to have dinner, though many times I ended up eating alone. I felt like I was carrying 2 lives on my shoulders, that of a father and a mother. Every night I'd talk to Mary's picture. Don't worry, I'm still keeping my promise. Our daughter will have everything. She'll live well, she'll be happy and respected. From then on, I worked harder than ever. I took on more jobs, stayed late, and more than once I fell asleep on bags of cement. My coworkers told me I was crazy. You're getting old, Arthur. Rest a little. Live for yourself. I'd just answer with a smile. I'm living for my daughter. Every time Emily came to see me, I'd make her favorite foods. She ate very little, distracted by her phone, but sometimes she'd smile and call me an old-timer. I wasn't offended, because in her laugh, I still found a trace of affection. Sometimes, on quiet nights, the wind would move the rose bushes, and I thought I could hear Mary's voice whispering, Do you remember the promise, Arthur? And I'd answer her softly, Of course, Mary. I've never forgotten it. I just didn't know that one day that promise would make me lose everything. I didn't understand then that by giving too much, I was feeding not only my daughter's dreams, but also the pride that would make her deny her roots. But at the time, I still believed that the promise made to Mary was the most sacred thing in my life. The promise of a husband and a father who didn't yet know that love, when it isn't guided by common sense, can turn into a tragedy. After Mary died, the house became so quiet that even sound seemed afraid to break the sadness. I tried to keep the old routines, getting up early, making coffee, and turning on the radio to the station Mary liked. The music still played, but there was no one there to sing along, no one to laugh. Emily was in her last year of college. She came home less and less. Sometimes she said she had work, other times that she had to study with classmates. I understood. Young people want to fly. But I still hoped that every weekend I'd hear that knock on the door and her voice. Dad, I'm home. Over time, though, those knocks became rare. Each time she came, I'd clean the whole house, buy good food, make the pot roast that Mary used to cook. I'd sit and wait, watching the clock, listening to the cars pass by, imagining her footsteps getting closer. When she finally arrived, she'd smile politely, eat quickly, and immediately pull out her phone, texting and laughing quietly. "How's school, honey?" I'd ask. "Fine, Dad." "Are you tired?" "No, just normal." And then, silence. The only sound was the clink of a spoon against a plate. I'd try to keep the conversation going. I'd tell stories from work, about the neighbor's dog, about the rose bush that was finally blooming. But her gaze was no longer on me. One day I passed by her room and saw her intern uniform hanging up, her heels lined up next to it. On her desk, the picture of Mary was face down. In its place, a picture of her and her friends in front of a modern, shiny building. I picked up my wife's photo and sighed. She's really grown up, Mary. She lives in another world now, a clean one, perfumed, and without cement dust. I didn't feel anger, just that feeling of being out of time. I was still in my worn-out shirt, my boots stained with drywall mud, drinking coffee as bitter as a construction worker's life. My daughter, on the other hand, started using words I didn't understand, with a different voice, softer, more distant. At night, when she was asleep, I'd go out to the garden to water the flowers. The light from her window fell on the rose bushes I planted for her mother. Looking up, I'd see her sitting at her desk, hair pulled back, smiling at her computer screen. I remembered then what Mary had told me. A day will come when our daughter will love someone else more than you. When that happens, don't be sad. That's the law of love. I wasn't sad. I was scared. Scared that in this new, shiny world, Emily would forget the cement-covered hands that built everything she now enjoyed. I went back to the kitchen. I sat in front of the empty place at the table. The food was cold. The steam was gone. I felt small, like the last brick left over after a job is done. I didn't know it then, but that silence between us wasn't temporary. It was the first brick in a wall that was starting to go up, a cold wall that would separate a simple father from a daughter who was starting to forget her roots. June in Cleveland can be a scorcher. The dust from the streets mixes with the smell of fresh cement from new construction, and the air gets thick, almost hard to breathe. I sit on the porch, my back against the wall, listening to the wind pass through the rose bushes. The petals barely move, red and bright under the afternoon sun. That's the only sound that still makes me feel alive. Ever since Emily started working, the house got strangely quiet. Every morning I get up early, make coffee, toast a piece of bread, and leave her portion on the table out of habit. But every day I find that bread untouched, just colder as the hours pass. I tell myself, she's busy. She'll remember the way home. But the weeks go by, and all I get are short, cold text messages. "I'm busy, Dad. Don't wait up for dinner." I try to keep busy. Every now and then, someone calls me to fix a wall or retile a floor. I take the jobs, not for the money, but for the sound. The hit of the hammer, the scrape of the trowel, the echo of metal on concrete, the only music that never lets me down. Every time I pick up a shovel, I remember Mary and the amused look she'd have when she saw me come home covered in dust. "You left half your life in those walls again, Arthur." Nobody says that to me now. In the afternoons, on my way back from the market, I pass the flower shop. The young owner asks me, "Flowers for your wife again, Mr. Arthur?" I smile, for her and for someone else. She doesn't understand, and she doesn't need to. I buy flowers for Mary and also for Emily, the girl I'm afraid will soon forget the smell of the earth from her own garden. When night falls, I eat dinner alone. The house fills with the sound of the knife on the plate, the chair scraping on the floor. I've gotten so used to the silence that sometimes a human voice scares me. I turn on the radio just to fill the void. The host talks about elegant weddings, about successful couples, and I think that maybe Emily's world is in that news, in a place where I no longer belong. One night, she called. Her voice sounded rushed, distant. "Dad, next month I want to bring David over so you can meet him. Make sure the garden looks nice, okay?" I felt a huge joy, like a kid who gets permission to come home. "You're bringing your boyfriend? That's great. I'll make your favorite dish." "Thanks, Dad." "Oh, and try to dress nice, okay? Don't wear your work clothes." She said it softly, but it hurt. I smiled awkwardly. Of course, honey, I understand. After we hung up, I got up, opened the closet, and took out my old white shirt. The fabric was worn, but I washed it. I ironed it carefully. I wanted to look presentable because it would be the first time I met the man my daughter loved. That night I went out on the porch again and looked at the rose bushes in the dark. I whispered, "Mary, our daughter is bringing her boyfriend home. Do you hear that? She's all grown up." A soft breeze moved the branches, as if someone up there were answering with a silent nod. I smiled, not knowing that this visit would be the beginning of my ruin, born from a dinner that seemed warm but would become the deepest wound of my life. That afternoon, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky was clear, the wind was soft, and the sun covered the old roofs of Cleveland in gold. I swept the patio, pruned the dry branches off the rose bushes, set the table and chairs, and put on Mary's music. The old tunes filled the house with a shaky warmth. Today, Emily was bringing her boyfriend, and I wanted this house, where she grew up, where her mother used to sing, to look decent and alive. I chose my white shirt, the one I hadn't worn in years, and the dress pants that still had a crease. I looked in the mirror, combed my hair, and put on a little aftershave. I remembered Mary, smiling, telling me, "You can't hide the smell of cement, Arthur, but it's the smell of a man you can trust." I laughed softly. I adjusted my collar and thought, I hope our daughter understands that. Around 6, I heard a car pull up, the sound of shoes on the pavement, and then the door opening. Emily came in first, wearing a blue dress, her hair pulled back, her face radiant. Behind her was a tall young man, well-dressed, his shoes shining like mirrors. "Dad, this is David." I held out my hand. "A pleasure, son." He shook it with a polite smile, his gaze kind but quick, as if he were afraid of getting dirty from the dust in the air. "A pleasure, Mr. Jenkins. Emily has told me a lot about you." I gave a small smile. I hope she said good things. We sat at the table. I'd made my pot roast, Emily's favorite, and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving since my own wedding. David looked around, his eyes landing on the old photos, Mary and me in work clothes, our hands still covered in plaster. Emily noticed his gaze, smiled with some discomfort, and changed the subject. "Dad, David and I are thinking of getting an apartment downtown after we get married." I nodded slowly. "The important thing, honey, is that you're happy." David took a sip of wine and said in a polite, serious voice, "I admire people who build with their hands. My father says that without you guys, the builders, we architects wouldn't be anything." I smiled, feeling something warm light up in my chest. He's right. No house can stand without a foundation, and people can't either. Emily laughed softly. "There you go with your philosophies, Dad." After dinner, I invited them out to the garden. The rose bushes were in full bloom, their scent filling the air. I cut a rose and handed it to Emily. "When you were a little girl, you said that on your wedding day, you wanted to carry flowers from this garden. I remember it well." She was quiet. Her smile was brief, a little forced. David put a hand on her shoulder, looked at the flowers, and then at me. "They're beautiful, Mr. Jenkins." "Thanks, son. I planted them myself, one by one." The sky was starting to get dark. When they left, I walked them to the door. David said goodbye politely, dipping his head. Emily gave me a quick hug and said quietly, "Dad, next time I'll take you to get a haircut, okay? So you look a little sharper." I smiled with a lump in my throat. "Sure, honey." The gate closed. The sound of the engine faded into the distance. I stayed on the patio, still holding the half-wilted rose. The petals fell to the ground, red as diluted blood under the porch light. In the evening wind, I thought I heard Mary's voice whispering, "You did good, Arthur, but don't let your kindness be mistaken for weakness." I looked up at the window of Emily's room, now empty. I didn't know that from that night on, under the warm light of a family dinner, the first invisible crack had already opened, a crack that would soon bring down everything I called a father's love. After that introductory dinner, I noticed a clear change in Emily. Her voice sounded different, softer, more rounded, choosing every word, as if she were afraid someone would find out where she really came from. She didn't call me Dad in the same way. It sounded more distant, foreign. At first I thought it was just her job, but over time I understood she was trying to leave the world we belonged to. Every time she came home, she didn't sit down to chat. Everything was rushed. Dad, I just came by to grab a few things. I have to go with David. His family invited us to dinner. Where do they live? I asked. Near downtown, Dad. They own 3 restaurants, you know? They even work with famous people. Her eyes shined with pride and distance. I nodded, swallowing a sigh. From then on, every visit was shorter, colder. She started to notice little things, the drywall mud on my shirt, the smell of paint, the cracks in my hands. One time, I walked her to her car. I tried to hug her, like always, but she pulled back with a tense smile. Dad, you have dust on your hands. You'll get my dress dirty. I left my arms hanging in the air and answered with a calm smile. You're right, honey. I forgot. I watched her drive away, the shiny car reflecting the old neighborhood. The kids on the block whispered, Mr. Arthur's daughter is rich. I just smiled. Inside, I felt pride and a silent weight, like someone looking for shade under a sun that shows no mercy. That night, I went to a small diner near an old site where Luis, a former apprentice of mine, was working. When he saw me, he came out smiling. Mr. Arthur, it's been a while. I shook his hand. His skin was as tough and leathery as mine used to be. Are you still working, boss? If you want, there's a new job in Akron that needs a supervisor. I shook my head. I only work for pleasure now. Luis looked at me with respect. You were the one who taught me how to hold a trowel, how to lay the first brick. Thanks to you, I have a house, a trade. Your hands are full of cement, but your heart is cleaner than any boss's shirt. His words left me speechless. I went home and sat on the porch for a long time, remembering that phrase and comparing it to the look in my daughter's eyes when she avoided my hug. I let out a sigh. The next day, Emily called. Dad, this weekend I'm inviting David's family over for dinner. Make sure the house is very clean, okay? Oh, and Dad, better not talk about your construction jobs. They're not used to that. I understand, honey. Thanks, Dad. And if you can, don't wear your work clothes. You know, David's mom is a bit particular. When she hung up, I sat still. It wasn't sadness I felt, but the bitter certainty that for the first time, I was being seen as a piece that didn't fit in the elegant picture my daughter wanted to paint. I looked at my hands. The same hands that built this house, that held my daughter, that buried my wife, and that raised up hope. In those blue, worn-out veins, a question seemed to be written that no one could answer. When did people start to be ashamed of where they came from? In the garden, the rose bushes were still blooming. But for the first time in my life, I didn't see them as beautiful. The red petals looked like they were burning slowly, a foreshadowing of the suffocating heat of humiliation that was approaching, still invisible, but relentless. I spent the whole day cleaning the house. I wiped down every door frame. I scrubbed every spot off the table. I swept the patio. I picked up the dry leaves from the path, one by one. Emily had told me David's family would arrive at 7 o'clock sharp, and I wanted everything to look spotless. I remembered her words clearly. Dad, don't talk about your jobs and don't wear your work clothes. I didn't feel anger, just the bitter feeling that someone had closed the door to my own house. Before the agreed time, I showered, shaved, and ironed the white shirt, the same one Mary bought me the only time we went to the city market together. I looked in the mirror, gray hair, a face lined with wrinkles, but my eyes were still steady. It's okay, I told myself. As long as my daughter isn't ashamed to have me by her side, everything will be fine. The doorbell rang at exactly 7. I went out, my heart trembling. At the door were Emily and David, and behind them, his parents, Richard and Carmen, tall, elegant, with cold eyes that seemed to measure everything. Dad, these are David's parents. I bowed my head respectfully. A pleasure to have you. Please come in. The house was lit by the warm light of the dining room. On the table, the pot roast, mashed potatoes, and green beans were waiting. I cooked like Mary taught me, simple, but with care. As I set down the plates, I sensed a strange silence. Carmen smiled slightly. How charming. A very traditional house. I didn't fully understand the words, but the tone was that of a compliment that wasn't one. Emily jumped in quickly. Dad loves to cook. When I was little, I always ate what he made. The woman nodded, an almost imperceptible curve on her lips. During dinner, Richard asked me, "So, you were an architect?" "No, sir, just a construction worker. I've worked on many buildings in the city." The atmosphere froze. Carmen put her glass down on the table and looked at her son. "David, you're still with the Architects Guild, right?" "Yes, Mom. We just signed a big contract downtown." I smiled to ease the tension. "That's excellent, and education is worth so much these days. All I know is bricks and mortar." No one responded. Emily looked down, cutting her meat with clumsy movements. After the meal, I made coffee and invited them to the garden. The rose bushes were in full bloom. "I planted these flowers when Emily was a little girl," I said with pride. "She said that on her wedding day she wanted to carry roses from this garden." I smiled, but I froze when I saw Carmen's gaze land on my hands, cracked and calloused. She turned away and took out a handkerchief to wipe her own. In that instant, I saw Emily's eyes. A flash of alarm, almost shame, as if she was afraid her future mother-in-law would discover something improper. I felt the air leave me. I forced myself to smile. "Excuse me," I said. "My hands are a bit rough. It's been a while since I've been around such distinguished company." No one answered. The chirping of crickets filled the silence, high-pitched, unbearable. When they said goodbye, David shook my hand with a certain pity. Carmen murmured, "It was an interesting evening, thank you." I nodded, not sure if she was truly thankful or just being polite. As soon as the door closed, Emily said to me in a low voice, "Dad, next time we'll have dinner at a restaurant. It's a little small here." I nodded. I didn't ask any questions. I already understood everything. That night I went out to the garden. The roses were still open, but under the porch light, they seemed stained with blood. I remembered something Mary used to say, "Never let anyone make you feel ashamed of your work." I whispered to the wind. "It seems that's starting to happen, my love." And in the rustling of the leaves, I thought I heard a sigh. Maybe it was mine. The sigh of a father who is finally understanding that when a child's pride grows, a father's love begins to wilt. After that dinner, Emily stopped coming by as often. Each visit was shorter, a few minutes, a few sentences, and a rush to leave. I didn't blame her. I told myself that young people have their own lives, but deep down, I knew something was changing. One afternoon near the end of the month, I was watering the roses when the phone rang. It was Emily's voice, trembling. "Dad, I need to talk to you. I'm coming by tonight, okay?" There was something in her tone, a heaviness that worried me. I cleaned the house, made coffee, and cut some coffee cake. I waited with a mix of fear and hope. She arrived around 7, wearing a cream-colored dress and carrying a small purse. "Sit down, honey. I just made coffee." She nodded in silence, putting her bag on the chair without looking at me directly. "Dad, David and I have decided to get married." I smiled with relief, my heart light. "That's wonderful. The day has finally come. If your mother were alive, she would be so happy." Emily bit her lip and looked down. "But this wedding is going to be a little different, Dad." I put down the coffee pot and looked at her closely. "Different in what way?" "David's family wants an elegant ceremony. With the press, with important guests. They want to have it at the Pinecrest." I laughed. "That's the best place in the city. Perfect, honey. It will be a beautiful day." But she didn't smile. She looked at me with a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Dad, I'm afraid you'll feel out of place." I frowned. Out of place? Why would I? "It's just, everyone will be very well dressed. They'll be talking about business, about politics. I'm just worried you won't be comfortable." Her words were soft, but they cut like a sharp blade. I smiled, trying to keep my voice calm. "I've worked under the sun and in the dust my whole life. Clean suits don't scare me." "I didn't mean it like that, Dad. Don't misunderstand me. I just want everything to be perfect." She spoke without looking at me. I fell silent. The room filled with a heavy silence. It was as if I were talking to someone who had my daughter's face, but not her heart. That night, after she left, I stayed in the garden for a long time. The wind moved the roses, and the smell of damp earth and old cement wrapped around me like a worn-out blanket. I looked up at her bedroom window, the one that used to be lit up every night when she was studying. Now there was only darkness. I remembered the first time I heard her call me Dad with that city accent. I remembered her pulling away so my hands wouldn't stain her dress. All those images mixed in my mind like muddy water. The wind picked up, a rose fell and brushed my shoulder. I picked it up. I breathed in its scent, and then I heard a whisper, soft and warm like the night breeze. Arthur, don't forget that love without respect is just an empty shadow. I shivered. It was Mary's voice. I stood up. I looked around. No one was there, just wind and darkness, but I understood. Maybe Mary was there, reminding me of what I had forgotten. A father can give everything, but he should never let his child trample on his dignity. I went into the house. I sat down at the notebook where I wrote down the wedding expenses. My hands were shaking. Outside, the wind kept blowing, carrying my name in its whispers, and I knew then that the storm was close, light as a breeze, but capable of knocking down everything I had built. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was so quiet that the ticking of the clock sounded like drops falling on my soul. I stayed in the kitchen, under the yellow light that lit up the cracks in my hands. Every one of those marks told a story. The walls I raised, the roofs I covered, the life I built with earth, mortar, and sweat. I brought my hands to my nose. The smell of cement was still there, rough and familiar, like my own breath. And yet, it was that smell that made my daughter feel ashamed. I looked at Mary's photo on the wall and mumbled, "Do you hear it, Mary? Our daughter is afraid of my smell." I smiled dryly and got up. I went to the bathroom. I turned on the water and scrubbed my hands with soap, over and over. The white foam filled the sink. It turned gray and ran down the drain. My skin burned. It opened up in small cuts. Blood mixed with the water. I kept scrubbing like a madman trying to wash away an invisible guilt. But the smell was still there, hidden between my fingers, stuck to my soul, as if it were part of me. I looked up at the mirror. The man looking back at me, gray-haired, with sunken eyes and bloody hands, questioned me. "So, you're a source of shame, Arthur, for earning a living with your hands?" I whispered the answer. "No, it's not my fault. The mistake was letting someone believe I wasn't worthy of love." I went back to the table. I poured a cup of black coffee. Outside, the wind hit the windows. In the middle of the noise, I heard Mary's voice. "Don't let them teach you to be ashamed of your work, Arthur. You promised me." I clutched the cup in my trembling fingers. She was right. I had forgotten. I forgot that Mary never wanted me to buy happiness at the price of humiliation. The memories came back like a flood. I saw Emily as a little girl, her tiny hands full of dust, hugging me and laughing. "Daddy, you smell like cement." Back then, I'd laugh and lift her up. "That's the smell of someone who builds a roof for you, honey." And now, that same little girl was saying that smell embarrassed her. I slumped into the chair, my head in my hands. For the first time in my life, I felt small. Not because of poverty, but because I understood that everything I had believed for years could be torn down by a few words from the person I loved most. The night grew thicker. The wind blew hard. A picture frame fell and shattered on the floor. I went over. It was the photo of my wedding with Mary, the one that always hung in the highest corner. I ran my fingers over the broken glass and mumbled, "Are you talking to me again, Mary?" I smiled sadly, but also with clarity. Something inside me had changed. The weak part, the fear, had gone with the wind. I sat down at the wedding expense notebook. Every number was like a brick in the wall I had built around myself. 18 months of sacrifice, every dollar earned with hard work. I looked at my hands, covered in dried blood. I didn't feel pain anymore, just a strange lightness. I knew what I had to do, not out of resentment, but because I couldn't keep selling my dignity. Love that forces a father to be ashamed of himself stops being love. I looked toward the window. The moon bathed the rose garden. The wind was still blowing, but this time I didn't hear Mary's tears, just her soft, smiling voice. "Now you understand, Arthur," and I answered in a low voice, "Yes, I understand now. It's time to wake up." The next morning, Cleveland woke up strangely calm. The sun fell gently on the roofs and a few sparrows sang on the garden fence. I woke up earlier than usual, not for work, but because a decision was already made inside me. I washed my face, changed my clothes, and went out to the garden. The morning wind passed through the rose bushes, bringing the damp smell of the earth. I bent down and touched the petals, roses I had planted more than 20 years ago. Each one a memory of Mary. Some bloomed the day our daughter was born, others the morning after her funeral, when I didn't know what to do but plunge my hands into the earth to keep from crying. Today the flowers were still as beautiful as ever, but inside me there was only cold. Last night I looked in the mirror and understood something. For years I've lived like a shadow of myself, giving everything without daring to keep a little dignity for myself. As I was watering the plants, a strong gust of wind suddenly picked up. The wedding bills, which I had left on the porch table, flew off like white butterflies, spinning in the air until they landed in front of Mary's portrait, framed in wood. The picture tilted and fell to the floor. The glass broke with a small sound, but inside me it echoed like thunder. I went over and picked it up. A piece of glass cut my finger, leaving a thread of blood. I looked at her face in the photo, the sweet smile, the still warm eyes, and I heard her voice, clear through the wind. Do you remember, Arthur? You promised to give our daughter everything, but without letting her forget to love what's real. I gripped the frame in my hands. Tears blurred my vision. Yes, Mary, I remember, but I forgot the second half of your words. I sat on the stone bench. The light filtering through the branches dappled my calloused hands. Mary's voice mixed with the wind, soft but firm. It wasn't a mistake to love her so much, but it was to let that love become chains. Our daughter didn't learn the value of work because you protected her from all effort. I bowed my head, still holding the portrait, my chest tight. I wanted to answer her, but the words wouldn't come. In the distance, the church bells rang, low and slow, like a reminder of time. I stood up and looked around the garden, that place that held half my life. Every rosebush was a memory. Every brick in the path, a trace of my hands and Mary's. And yet, today I knew I had to leave. I went into the house, cleaned the frame with a cloth, and put it back in its place. Thank you, Mary. You came just in time to remind me. The wind on the porch died down, and the rose bushes moved just slightly as if nodding. I looked out at the sun-drenched street. For the first time in many years, I felt peace, without fear, without expectations. I knew that morning marked a point of no return. Before leaving, I stopped in front of the photo and murmured, "Today I'll do the right thing. I'm going to keep the last piece of honor you left me." I took a deep breath. The smell of the roses, the earth, and the cement on my hands mixed together, no longer a source of shame, but as a testament to a life lived with truth. I went out to the patio. The sun fell on my shoulders. In the air, I heard a faint laugh, Mary's, saying, "Go on, Arthur. You're awake now." When the clock struck 6 in the morning, I was already sitting at the kitchen table. In front of me, a pile of papers, invoices, contracts, expense lists for the wedding. The dawn light came through the window and reflected on the numbers, on my signature. Every sheet was an open wound, proof of blind love and of devotion turned into a habit. I opened the notebook and went over the pages. Banquet hall, $12,000, wedding dress, $8,500, music, flowers, photographer. Every line was heavier than the last. I felt like my whole life was written between those cold figures. I smiled bitterly. The coffee tasted as bitter as my thoughts. I already knew what I had to do, not out of anger, but because I finally understood that love cannot exist without respect. I stood up, took a deep breath, and started making calls. The first call was to the Pinecrest, the wedding venue. A sleepy female voice answered, "Good morning. This is Arthur Jenkins, the father of the bride. The wedding is canceled." There was a stunned silence. Then the young woman asked, "I'm sorry? Sir, everything is already prepared." "I know," I answered slowly, "but the bride no longer needs this celebration." I heard her nervous voice talk about contracts, deposits, clauses. I just replied, "Take care of the flowers and the music. Let them be used for another wedding. Mine ended last night." I hung up the phone. My chest felt light, as if I had dropped a stone I'd been carrying for years. Second call. Valentina Ramirez, the dress designer. "Ms. Valentina, I'm sorry, this is Arthur Jenkins. My daughter's dress won't be needed anymore. There were a few seconds of silence, and then a sigh. I'm sorry, Mr. Arthur. I understand. May God be with you. Third call. The florist, then the band, the photographer, the chef. I repeated the same phrase over and over. The bride no longer needs your services. Maudit. Every word cut an invisible cord, and with every call, I breathed a little more freely. When I finished, I went out to the garden. The sun bathed the rose bushes, bright in the dew. I cut the most beautiful flowers, tied them carefully, and walked to the cemetery at the end of the street. It was a familiar path. Every brick on the sidewalk held the imprint of my steps and Mary's. When I reached her grave, I knelt and left the bouquet on the cold stone. Do you see, Mary? I did the right thing. I kept a little dignity, yours and mine. I will no longer buy our daughter's love with money stained with sweat. The wind moved the leaves softly. I closed my eyes, and in the breeze I heard her laugh, warm and tender. Back at home, I sat down to write a letter. My hand was shaking, but the letters came out firm. Emily, since the smell of cement and your father's rough hands can cause you shame, I've decided not to bother you anymore. The wedding is canceled. I will keep the money for something that deserves it. Your father, the one you called an embarrassment. I folded the letter and put it in a yellow envelope with her name on it. For Emily. I left it in the center of the table where she couldn't miss it. Then I opened the window and breathed in the fresh Cleveland air. The sunlight touched my face, light, as if freeing me from an old weight. Inside me, Mary's voice echoed, warm and proud. You have defended your honor, Arthur. Now you can live with your head held high. I smiled and replied in a low voice, Thank you, Mary. From today on, I will live for myself, not for anyone else's shame. The ringing of the phone broke the silence of the quiet Cleveland morning. I was on the porch, a steaming cup of coffee in my hands. On the table, the letter I had written last night was still there, in the yellow envelope, the corner of the paper folded by the night wind. I hadn't touched it. I was just waiting for her to arrive. Emily. Around 8, a car's brakes screeched in front of the gate. The door flew open. The sound of heels echoed loudly on the tile floor. Dad! She screamed, her voice broken with desperation. What did you do? I looked up. She was standing there, her hair messy, her eyes swollen, and the phone shaking in her hand. I called the venue, the band, the photographer. They all say you canceled the contracts. Have you gone crazy? I put the cup on the table and answered calmly. I'm not crazy, Emily. I'm just awake. Her face hardened, a mixture of anger and fear. Do you know how much it cost me to organize everything? David's family is furious. They say you've humiliated them in front of the whole city. What family? I asked, not raising my voice. The one that thinks your father's an embarrassment? She hesitated. I continued. I heard what you said, Emily. To David. About the smell of cement. About the shame of having a father like me. Her face turned pale. Her mouth trembled. No, it wasn't like that, Dad. Then how was it? I've spent my life building your roof, your future, and you're ashamed of the smell of my hands. I stood up and took the letter from the table. You've forgotten the most important thing. I wasn't born to be the background of any picture, not even yours. I put the envelope in front of her. Here is everything I had to say to you. Read it. Emily snatched it from my hands, tore it open, and read it hurriedly. Her fingers were shaking, her eyes widened. Since the smell of cement causes you shame, I have decided not to bother you anymore. The wedding is canceled. I will keep the money for something that deserves it. She crumpled the paper in anger. You don't have the right. It's my life, not yours. I smiled sadly. You're right. That's why I'm giving it back to you. Take responsibility for your decisions. Just then, a car engine was heard. David stormed into the yard, his face red. Mr. Jenkins, what is the meaning of this? You've made my family look ridiculous. I turned to him. Son, shame only exists when you forget who you are. I'm clear on who I am. You two are not. You're going to pay for this, he spat between his teeth. Maybe, I replied, but I still have something that can't be bought. My dignity. No. Emily burst into tears and collapsed into a chair. It hurt me to see her like that, but my voice remained firm. You don't understand it now, honey, but one day you will. I didn't cancel your wedding out of hate, but so you wouldn't start a new life based on a lie. She looked up, her makeup smeared, and shouted through her sobs. You ruined my life. I shook my head. No, Emily, I just stopped the day you were going to bury your honor. The wind blew hard, scattering rose petals across the floor. I looked away so I wouldn't see her expression break. I knew that if I faltered for even a second, I would lose forever what Mary asked me to protect. David grabbed her by the arm and pulled her toward the car, giving me a look of hatred before slamming the door. The sound of the tires on the gravel faded, leaving only silence. I went out onto the porch. The sky was a pale blue. I took a deep breath. The air carried the scent of roses mixed with cement. I whispered, "Do you see, Mary?" I did what I had to do. A petal landed on my shoulder, as light as a nod, and I knew the storm was just beginning, because when pride is wounded, people don't cry. They get even. And this time, the one holding the knife would be my own daughter. 2 days after that morning, the whole neighborhood was buzzing with the news. The construction worker's daughter's wedding was canceled right before the ceremony. I heard it in the diner, at the market, even at the corner store. People talked, some with pity, others whispering judgment. I didn't defend myself. I stayed quiet. The silence of someone who is tired of explaining to the world what is right. On Tuesday morning, I received a letter sent by express mail. The envelope was thick and had the logo of a well-known law firm downtown. I opened it. In cold capital letters, I read, "Petition for guardianship due to mental incapacity. Petitioner, Emily Jenkins." I read it over and over as if I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My daughter, the one I carried on my shoulders in the rain, was suing me, asking for me to be declared incompetent so she could manage my property and accounts. I stood motionless, the wind rattling the tin roof. The paper trembled in my hands, but I wasn't shaking from fear, but from shock. How could a person's heart change so quickly? At noon, David showed up, but he wasn't alone. 2 men in black suits were with him. "Mr. Jenkins, we need to talk," one said. "Talk," I replied. "Emily doesn't want to take it this far, but you hurt her. You need to prove you're of sound mind or agree to transfer the administration of your assets." I looked at him, my voice slow and hard as cold iron. "Are you teaching me how to be a father?" "No, sir," he replied with a short smile. "I'm protecting the woman who will be my wife. She says you're unstable, that you act impulsively." I said nothing more. I looked at the garden, where the roses were still burning red. Inside, the storm had already broken. That evening, Emily came. She wasn't wearing her office dress. She was wearing black, and her face was a mask. I saw the little girl who used to beg me, "Daddy, don't go to work. Stay home with me," turned into a stranger before me. "I don't want to do this, Dad, but I have to. I can't let you destroy my future," she said in a clipped voice. I nodded slowly. "Maybe I have destroyed it. The future you wanted to build on a lie." "Don't say that," she protested. "Everyone says you're not well. Who cancels a wedding 2 weeks out? Who with any judgment?" I didn't answer. She fell silent. A sharp look crossed her eyes for a second, but David's voice from the door called her. "Emily, let's go. Leave him." She turned around without looking back. The slam of the gate sounded dry, a thud that split my chest like a period at the end of a sentence. At night, the rain came. The water mixed the smell of earth, cement, and the salty taste of pain. I looked at the gray sky and whispered, "Mary, can you believe it? Our daughter wants to take me to court." The wind cut through me like a chill. I felt her voice, soft and pained. "She doesn't understand yet, Arthur, but don't let the storm knock you down." I opened the drawer and took out the notebook where I kept the number of an old friend, Frankie Russo, a retired lawyer and a buddy from my days inspecting sites. I called him. "Frankie, I need help. My daughter is trying to declare me crazy." Silence on the other end. Then his gravelly voice answered, "Arthur, there are a lot of old men who get dragged into court by their own blood, but knowing you, they'll be the ones who end up regretting it." I hung up and just sat there. Outside, the rain beat against the wood. Through the noise, I thought of Emily's voice when she was little. "Daddy, don't go to work. Stay home with me." I smiled bitterly, and my tears mixed with the water running down the window. I didn't sleep that night. The old house shook with the storm, but inside me, there was no more shaking. I knew the battle that would begin at dawn would be the last one of my life. and I would fight to the end. Not to win, but to keep a father's dignity. The day of the hearing, the Cleveland sky was gray, threatening rain. I wore my oldest suit, but it was clean, my black shoes freshly shined, and the watch Mary gave me before she died. I didn't have my own lawyer, just Frank Russo, my old friend, his hair as white as mine, but his eyes still firm. Before we went into the courtroom, he put a hand on my shoulder. Easy, Arthur. They might win on paper, but they can't beat the truth. The room was cold. In the opposite bench, Emily sat next to David and two young lawyers in black suits. I looked at her, but she avoided my eyes, pretending to look over documents, her head down, just like when she was a little girl and knew she'd done something wrong. Only today she wasn't crying. The judge entered. The gavel banged. Case 47825, petition for guardianship due to mental incapacity. Petitioner, Emily Jenkins. Respondent, Arthur Jenkins. Emily's lawyer stood up, his voice like a distant news report. Your Honor, my client has been forced to act. Her father is showing clear signs of imbalance. Mr. Jenkins, in a fit, unilaterally canceled all wedding contracts, causing serious financial damages and affecting the reputation of the Morales family. He used David's family name, I see. A murmur went through the room. I lowered my head, clenching my fists. Frank stood up, his voice slow but steady. Hearing the voice of the dead doesn't mean madness, Your Honor. Thinking about those we loved who are gone is the most human thing there is. And canceling his daughter's wedding wasn't an act of dementia, but of courage. The courage of a father who refuses to watch his daughter trade dignity for status. The judge was silent, then pointed at me. Mr. Jenkins, please approach. Do you wish to make a statement? I walked slowly to the stand, my old hat in my hand. I've lived 73 years with these hands, I said. They're full of scars and plaster, but they have never stolen a dollar. I loved my daughter more than myself. I worked my whole life so she would want for nothing. But if today, love also demands giving up one's dignity, I prefer to keep what little pride I have left. My voice trembled, but it didn't break. I am not crazy, Your Honor. I have only lost the daughter I thought understood me. The room was silent. I saw Emily's shoulders hunch, her eyes shining with tears, but David took her hand and forced her to keep looking forward. The judge lowered his head, took notes, and said in a neutral voice, "The court will evaluate the psychological report and witness testimonies before issuing a ruling." I went back to my seat, feeling light, like someone who has set down a heavy load. Frank leaned in and whispered, "You spoke well, Arthur. Today you made them listen with their hearts, not just the law." I smiled slightly. I still didn't know what the verdict would be, but I understood that day I had reclaimed the most valuable thing in my life, the right to look at my daughter without lowering my head. 2 weeks after the hearing, I was summoned back to court. The sun was beating down on Cleveland, and the wind kicked up dust in the streets. I walked with Frank, my old hat in my hand, and my heart calm. I was no longer thinking about winning or losing. I just wanted to hear one fair word, even a small one. In the courtroom, Emily was already seated, impeccably made up, wearing a black coat, her expression hardened. David was next to her, his face like stone. I approached the bench. I nodded my head in a brief greeting. She barely turned her face. The judge, a man with salt and pepper hair, opened the file and spoke in a grave voice. "The court has reviewed the medical reports, the testimonies, and the documents presented. We heard the rustle of papers, the light tap of a pen. No one breathed loudly. The expert reports confirm that Mr. Arthur Jenkins shows no signs of mental incapacity. Therefore, the petition for guardianship is denied." I closed my eyes and let out a long sigh. Something inside me broke, but not from pain, from relief, like a flower petal falling softly to the ground. I didn't smile. I just felt the tears running without realizing it. Frank put a hand on my shoulder. "See, Arthur? Justice is slow sometimes, but it always arrives." On the other side, David was gritting his teeth and whispering something in Emily's ear. She was pale, her hands shaking. When the judge finished, I turned to my daughter and spoke in a low but firm voice. "You didn't lose, Emily. You just don't understand what it means to truly win yet." She looked up, her eyes wet, her voice cracking. Dad, I just wanted to protect my honor. I smiled at her tenderly. Honor isn't something people give you, honey. It's what you have left when you've lost everything else. The courtroom fell silent. The judge stood, nodded his head, and left. Everyone started gathering their papers. I walked slowly toward my daughter. She remained motionless, undecided whether to run or to face me. I took an old handkerchief from my pocket, the one Mary had embroidered with both of our names when Emily was a child, and I left it on the table in front of her. I'm not angry, just sad. I hope someday you remember who the first person was who taught you to hold your head high. I turned around. Behind me, I heard a chair scrape, as if she wanted to say something, but held back. Outside? The sun was blinding, and dust floated over the hot asphalt. I looked up at the blue sky, breathing deep. The wind messed up my gray hair, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was really breathing, not with my body, but with my soul. Frank smiled and clapped me on the back. It's over. What will you do now? I looked toward the horizon. Maybe I'll leave Cleveland. This city is full of memories, but it doesn't have a place for me anymore. I want to live where there's peace, where nobody calls me the old man who smells of cement. My friend nodded slowly. If Mary could see this, I'm sure she'd be smiling, I replied in a calm voice. I'm convinced she is, Frankie, because in the end, I kept my promise. I didn't let anyone make me feel ashamed of my own hands. We walked under the sun, leaving the courthouse and the murmurs behind. On the old road back, I felt a different kind of silence, not one of loneliness, but the peace of someone who has reclaimed their lost dignity. I got home as the sun was setting. The last rays covered the roof shingles in a golden veil, making the house look like it was burning in silence. On the porch, the rose bushes were still blooming, though many branches had broken in last night's storm. I knelt and picked up the fallen petals one by one. The deep red stuck to my fingers, spreading like dried blood. The house was too still. The creak of the door, the whistle of the wind slipping through the walls, the old smell of morning coffee. Everything mixed into a strange emptiness. I sat in front of Mary's photo on the wall. Her smile seemed brighter than ever. Do you see, my love? In the end, justice was on our side, I whispered. The wind moved the curtain, and I heard her voice, soft as a sigh. You did it, Arthur. I laughed quietly. It wasn't a laugh of joy, but of someone who has finally made it around a difficult bend in the road. There was no hate or anger left in me, only tiredness. I had survived the sun, the dust, the hunger, but I had never felt an emptiness as big as I did today, the day I won, and lost the most valuable thing. The afternoon slipped by slowly. I went out to the garden and looked at the rose bushes I planted with my own hands. Despite the beating from the rain, they were still standing tall. Then I understood. Maybe people are like flowers. We only learn to stand firm after the wind has battered us. I took my old notebook, opened it to the last page, and wrote, The court can declare me sane, but my heart is already cracked. Still, I thank life for showing me who truly loved me, and who only loved me as long as I was useful. I closed the notebook and left it next to Mary's portrait. I'm tired, Mary. Maybe I'll leave here. I looked around. The house where my daughter's laughter echoed, where Mary and I spent sleepless nights weighed down by debt and dreams. Every brick, every nail bore my mark. Now everything was silent, as if waiting for a farewell. When the sun disappeared completely, I packed a few things in a bag. Some clothes, the notebook, Mary's photo, and my old mason's trowel. I looked at the house one last time and took a deep breath. The smell of cement was still there, strong and earthy. The smell of an honest life. Before closing the door, I murmured, Thank you, my home. You have been the only witness to this love. And I walked away. My back was bent, but my step was firm. On the path leading to the highway, the wind picked up some rose petals and made them fly after me. I didn't look back. At 73, I understood that some goodbyes don't need tears. Just a determined step to keep the human part that's still left inside you. I left Cleveland one morning in early fall, when the dew still covered the rooftops and the church bells were just beginning to ring. The old bus shook as it climbed the hill to the highway. I sat by the window and, through the fogged-up glass, I watched the familiar houses disappear. The streets, the trees, the corners of a whole lifetime now turned into memory. In my bag, I had a few changes of clothes, Mary's photo, and the little money I had left after the trial. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away from that place full of wounds. Frank had suggested Florida, the state by the sea that my wife had once dreamed of visiting. I listened to him. 4 hours later, the ocean appeared before me, immense, deep blue, with the sun pouring gold onto the waves. The salt wind hit my face, rough and clean at the same time. I took a deep breath. I felt everything heavy inside my chest dissolve with every rush of the water. I found a little bungalow on the outskirts of town, with a green roof and an old mango tree in the yard. The owner, a kind old woman, told me, "It's quiet here, sir. At night all you hear are the waves and the crickets." I smiled. That's enough for what's left of my life. The following days began to take on a rhythm. I'd get up early, walk to the shore, collect shells, and watch the sunrise. In the afternoons, I planted rose bushes by the fence, using my old trowel that had been my companion for half a century. At first, the soil was hard. The salt wind withered the leaves. But I didn't give up. I talked to the flowers as if they were people. Don't be afraid. You can bloom in any soil if there are hands that still believe. Soon, the neighbors started to recognize me. The children would run up to me and call me Grandpa Arthur, asking me to fix their fences or patch a roof. When I finished, they'd laugh. "Did the cement smell go away, Grandpa?" And I'd answer with a chuckle, "This smell will follow me my whole life." And now, I'm proud of it. At night, I'd sit on the porch, listening to the waves crash while holding Mary's photo. The moonlight came through the window and made her face glow sweetly. "Do you see, Mary?" I whispered. "I finally made it to the place you dreamed of. No one here makes fun of the smell of cement. No one looks down on rough hands." A sea breeze passed through the young rose bushes, bringing the scent of the ocean mixed with the faint perfume of the new flowers. I closed my eyes. I felt my heart was still, clear as the morning water. After so many storms, I had finally found what I never had in my entire life, a peace that no one could take away from me. Time passed more quickly than I imagined. In a few months, my little house in Florida was full of life. The rose bushes had taken root and perfumed the air every morning, and the neighborhood kids ran through the yard, laughing under the mango tree. They called me Grandpa Arthur, and sometimes they'd fight over who got to help me water the plants, sweep the floor, or fix the fence. I felt a new warmth in my chest, the same warmth I hadn't felt since the day Emily left. One afternoon, I saw a group of children from the St. James Children's Home pass in front of the house. The nuns were taking them to the beach to get some fresh air and collect shells. Among them was a boy of about 10, limping slightly, holding an empty can as a bucket. He would bend down to pick up shells and then wave at me with a smile. That smile hit my soul. It was like seeing Emily as a little girl again, pure, innocent, without pride. I went over to talk to the sister in charge. She told me the orphanage needed money to repair the roof before the rainy season. I thought about it all night. The next morning, I went over there with my trowel, a bag of cement, and some old tools. The nun was worried. "Are you going to do it all by yourself, Mr. Arthur?" I smiled. "I've worked alone my whole life, sister, but if you can lend me a few small hands, we'll finish sooner." And so, every afternoon, I taught the children how to mix the mortar, lay bricks, and plaster the walls. They did it with enthusiasm, their hands dirty and their eyes bright. I'd tell them in a firm but cheerful voice, "Never be ashamed of having dirty hands. You should only be ashamed if your heart is dirty. Hands that work are hands that know how to love." The new roof was finished in 2 weeks. From the top of the ladder, with the sea breeze moving my white hair, I saw the children clapping and shouting with joy. My heart trembled, not from exhaustion, but from happiness. That night, I wrote my will. It was a simple sheet with just a few lines. "I, Arthur Jenkins, leave all my money and this house to the St. James Children's Home, because those children were never ashamed to hug an old man who smells like cement." I signed it, folded the paper carefully, and put it between the pages of the notebook where Mary's and Emily's names were still written. Outside, the moon was rising over the sea, and the waves murmured their eternal song. I looked toward the bright horizon and said in a low voice, "Now I understand, Mary. Maybe God took one daughter from me to give me a multitude of grandchildren." I smiled, feeling light. Between the sound of the waves and the laughter of the children still playing in the distance, I knew I was no longer alone. I had become a father once more, but this time, to souls who would never know the shame of loving. It's been 3 years since the day I got to Florida. My hair has turned completely white, but my heart has never felt so light. Every morning I wake up before the sun, make a cup of black coffee, and open the door to let in the sea breeze. The rose bushes in the garden have already climbed all over the fence, burning red like little flames lit in the midst of peace. One afternoon, while I was watering the plants, the sister from St. James came over with a letter in her hand. "You've got mail from Cleveland, Mr. Arthur," she said. I looked at the handwriting on the envelope. Soft, familiar, Emily. I was silent for a long time before opening it. Inside was a small sheet with shaky handwriting. "Dad, I'm sorry. I understand everything now, even though it's too late. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but every time I see my daughter playing in the sand, I remember your hands covered in cement. If I can, I'd like to visit you one time." I folded the letter and left it on the table. I didn't feel anger, and I didn't cry. Some apologies arrived late, but they still managed to warm what's left of a life. I wrote a short note and gave it to the sister to mail. "I forgive you, Emily, but I can't go back. A broken tree can still stand, but it doesn't give shade like it used to." That night, I went to the beach. The sky was on fire with red tones. The waves erased my footprints on the wet sand. I brought Mary's photo with me. I placed it on the shore and murmured, "My love, I finally kept my promise. Our daughter understands, even if it's late, and I'm no longer ashamed of who I am." I stayed for a long time, watching the sun sink into the sea. The wind mixed the smell of salt with the earth and the faint scent of roses on my shirt. Everything that used to hurt was transformed into calm. When night fell, I smiled and said to myself in a low voice, "It's better to be alone with dignity than to live accompanied by shame." In the end, I found a place where no one is ashamed of the person who lives there. The sound of the waves marked a serene rhythm, like the beat of a heart, and I knew then that my life was closing in peace. If this story captivated you, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left of the screen. Thanks for watching.